Everyone knows Rome fell, but few understand why, and fewer still realize they're living through the same story today. Rome wasn't destroyed by an army, it was destroyed by time, by arrogance, by a slow decay disguised as progress. And if you pay attention, the same forces that hollowed out the greatest empire in history are quietly eroding America from within. Different era, same pattern, same ending. In the 5th century, Romans believed collapse was impossible. They had the strongest military, the reserve currency of the ancient world, and technology that seemed decades ahead of its time. Their citizens were entertained, comfortable, and certain that Rome's power was eternal, until one day it wasn't. Sound familiar? Prices rising faster than your paycheck, a government spending more on the military than the next 10 nations combined, a population distracted, divided, scrolling endlessly while the foundations shake beneath them. You're not paranoid. You're watching history repeat itself in real time. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what worries you most about the economy today? Because once you understand how empires collapse, you'll start to see every headline differently. Not as news, but as already seen. Every empire begins with trust, and every collapse begins when that trust runs out. For Rome, trust was made of silver. A single coin, the denarius, carried the empire's promise. Merchants from Britain to Egypt accepted it without question. It was value, it was stability, it was civilization pressed into metal. But under the glitter of marble temples and triumphant parades, Rome had a problem. Endless wars, massive infrastructure projects, a growing welfare system that fed its citizens bread and dreams, but drained its treasury dry. Taxes alone couldn't fund it. Conquest no longer paid for itself. So, Rome did what every government does when it runs out of money. It cheated. At first, it was subtle. The emperor's mints shaved a little silver from each coin, replacing it with cheaper copper and bronze. No one noticed. The coins still gleamed. The emperor's face still stared proudly from their surface. But the lie grew. By 200 AD, the denarius was less than 50% silver. By 265 AD, barely 5%. A coin that once shone like a mirror of trust became dull, red, worthless. And something invisible broke. Merchants stopped accepting Roman coins. Soldiers demanded payment in gold or goods. Prices exploded. What once cost 1 denarius now cost 10, then 100, then 1,000. Trade froze. Confidence vanished. Rome's economy didn't just inflate, it fractured. This was more than the fall of currency. It was the death of belief. Because once people realize the money in their hands means nothing, society itself starts to unravel. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold, closing what was known as the gold window. From that day forward, America's money was backed by nothing but faith. No gold, no silver, just the promise that it would still be worth something tomorrow. At first, like Rome, no one noticed. The dollar still looked the same. The power of America still seemed infinite. But something subtle began to change. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. The money supply, once a reflection of value, became a weapon of convenience. And in 2020 alone, amid panic and politics, the US printed 40% of all dollars ever created. 40% in 1 year. Rome's debasement took centuries. America's has taken decades. Different technology, same temptation, same consequence. Your grandparents could buy a home on a single income. A car cost a few $1,000s. College was a path, not a debt trap. Today, those same dreams are priced in a currency that's quietly dissolving. Inflation isn't just numbers on a chart. It's time, your time, losing value. It's hours of work, buying less food, less energy, less future. Rome learned this too late. Its emperors minted coins faster, raised wages, printed promises, but every fix made the wound deeper. Eventually, people stopped believing altogether. The economy shrank to barter, cities emptied, trade routes died. An empire that once commanded continents couldn't command trust. And that's the real story of collapse, not when the barbarians arrived, but when the coins stopped meaning anything. Because money isn't metal, it's belief. And when belief dies, so does the empire. Keep watching, because what happened next didn't just destroy Rome's economy, it reshaped its entire world. And the same pattern is reappearing today. Power, like gold, always tempts you to spend more of it. And Rome, drunk on its own greatness, spent it everywhere. At its height, the empire controlled the Mediterranean, Western Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its legions marched from the fog of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Every border it conquered, it had to guard. Every victory became another obligation. The empire was a living organism, vast, magnificent, and constantly hungry, and its army was the bloodstream that kept it alive. But that bloodstream came at a cost. By the 3rd century, more than half of Rome's entire budget went to the military. Thousands of fortifications had to be manned, supplied, and repaired. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Generals demanded more glory. Enemies demanded attention on every frontier. Persia in the east, Germanic tribes in the north, revolts in Egypt and Gaul. The empire bled silver to keep its borders intact. Pull back and you lose territory. Stay and you bleed out. That was the impossible equation Rome faced. So the emperors did what desperate governments always do. They taxed harder. They squeezed the provinces, confiscated land, and debased their currency further just to pay their soldiers. But every coin that went to the front lines meant fewer roads repaired, fewer granaries filled, fewer citizens cared for. The empire began to rot from the edges inward. The generals fought to hold the line, but the treasury couldn't keep up. Rome didn't fall because its soldiers were weak. They were the finest the world had ever seen. It fell because no army can defend an empire that's already bankrupt. Now look at America. In 2024, the US defense budget surpassed $850 billion, more than China, Russia, India, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, Japan, and South Korea combined. The US maintains roughly 750 military bases in over 80 countries. Troops in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, all standing guard for a world order that's becoming harder and more expensive to maintain. It's a map that looks eerily familiar to Rome's. Global, ambitious, and sustainable. And it's not just the money, it's the opportunity cost. That $850 billion could rebuild infrastructure, fund schools, reduce national debt, or modernize industry. Instead, it maintains an empire that's struggling to define why it exists. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union learned this lesson the hard way, collapsing under the weight of military spending it could no longer afford. America watched it happen, and then repeated it. Rome's legions were the best in history. America's military is unmatched. But even the strongest sword can't defend an empty treasury. Empires always imagine their reach equals their strength. But reach without balance becomes a liability. Every foreign base, every carrier group, every endless operation, they all demand tribute from the future. And the future always collects. Rome tried to cut costs by pulling troops from the edges and watched the borders disintegrate. Cities once protected by legions were raided. Farmers fled. Trade routes became death traps. What was once Pax Romana, the Roman peace, turned into chaos. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes in the cruelest ways. Because power, like a muscle, weakens when overused. The more you flex it, the more fragile it becomes. Today, America's might spans the world, but its economy staggers under $34 trillion of debt. Its roads crumble. Its citizens argue over ideology, while their empire quietly ages. No civilization falls in a single night. It falls in the moment it starts mistaking dominance for destiny. That's what Rome did. That's what every empire does. And just like Rome, America faces the same unspoken truth. You can't defend everything and keep anything. Keep watching, because the next phase of collapse didn't come from outside the walls. It came from inside the minds of its people. When the sword could no longer keep Rome together, the spectacle took its place. In the 2nd century, the Roman poet Juvenal wrote that the people had surrendered their power for two things: panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Free food, endless entertainment. As long as the citizens were fed and amused, they wouldn't ask questions. It was genius and tragic. Every week, tens of thousands packed into the Colosseum, a monument of stone and blood. They watched gladiators fight to the death, prisoners executed for sport, entire mock sea battles staged with ships flooding the arena. And it worked. The people cheered while their empire decayed around them. Corruption spread, inflation soared, the borders collapsed, but who cared as long as the games went on? Rome's elite understood something powerful. A distracted population is a controllable population. As long as they could keep the public entertained, no one would notice the foundations cracking. Fast forward 2,000 years. We've traded stone amphitheaters for digital ones. The gladiators are gone, but the algorithms remain. Today, the average American spends over 7 hours a day staring at screens, scrolling, consuming, numbing, not creating, not questioning, just feeding the machine. Rome had the Colosseum. America has Netflix, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, a constant stream of dopamine, perfectly engineered to keep you watching, not thinking. And when the anxiety rises, when people start feeling that something is wrong, the empire does what Rome once did. It suits them. In 2020 and 2021, trillions of dollars were printed and handed out as stimulus checks, not to fix the system, but to keep people quiet, to delay the reckoning. Bread and circuses, reborn as direct deposits and endless content. The faces on the screens change. The empires don't. Think about it. When was the last time you saw protests over monetary policy, over the Federal Reserve printing money, over $34 trillion in national debt? You don't, because no one protests when they are entertained. Instead, we rage about celebrity scandals, political theater, and viral trends. The algorithm feeds outrage, not understanding, reaction, not reflection. We scroll through the noise and call it information. In Rome, citizens were given just enough comfort to surrender their freedom. In America, citizens are given just enough distraction to surrender their attention. And attention, in this new age, is freedom. When people no longer control what they focus on, they no longer control what they believe. And when belief dies, democracy follows. Rome's emperors use spectacle to hide weakness. Today's leaders use entertainment to do the same. They show us motion instead of progress, debate instead of change, distraction instead of dilection. But here's the haunting truth. Rome didn't collapse because of decadence. It collapsed because decadence became the only thing left that worked. When the economy stopped producing value, the empire produced distraction, and that distraction became its culture. America is approaching the same point. A civilization that once built, discovered, and created now entertains itself to death. One scroll, one episode, one dopamine hit at a time. The result? A society that's too busy watching the fire to realize it's the one burning. And when people finally look up, they'll see what Rome saw. Empty coffers, crumbling infrastructure, a generation that traded meaning for entertainment. The empire doesn't fall when it's conquered. It falls when its people stop caring. Because an empire can survive enemies, but it can't survive indifference. And what comes next is the moment every empire fears. When the spectacle ends and reality begins to collect its debt. Keep watching, because what's happening now isn't new. It's the final chapter being written all over again. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell in moments. A coin debased here, a border abandoned there, a citizen choosing comfort over courage. Collapse isn't sudden. It's a long sleep that feels like progress, until you wake up and realize the dream is gone. Every empire tells itself the same story. We're different. We're exceptional. The rules don't apply to us. Rome believed it. Britain believed it. The Soviet Union believed it. And now, America whispers it too. But history doesn't care about pride. It only cares about patterns. And those patterns, currency debasement, military overreach, bread and circuses, are written all over our present. The Romans thought their silver would always hold value. They thought their legions would always protect them. They thought their citizens would always stay loyal. Until they didn't. By the time they realized what had been lost, it was too late to fix it. The truth is, you can't stop an empire from collapsing once the mechanism is in motion. But you can choose what kind of person you'll be when it does. In every age of decline, there are two kinds of people. Those who pretend it's not happening, and those who prepare, quietly, calmly, intentionally. The Romans who held land, gold, and skills survived the fall. The ones who trusted the system didn't. So the lesson isn't panic, it's perspective. Value what's real, Build what lasts, because the empire may not endure, but your choices can. If this story opened your eyes, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments what lesson will you remember when history starts to rhyme again. Because history doesn't repeat, but it whispers. And right now, it's whispering to us.